On this map here, each of these shaded areas represents one of our member agencies. And so in total, we have 26 member agencies. About half of them are local cities, and the other half are wholesalers. Some of them do retail service. Our cities primarily do retail service. And in total, through our member agencies, we serve 19 million residents across Southern California, so about half of the state. And so, in terms of our supply portfolio, about 50% of our supplies come from imported water, 20% through the Colorado River, and then 30% from the State Water Project. As many of you may know, we're currently kind of renegotiating our agreement for water usage on the Colorado River. And so, unfortunately, that amount could decrease even further. And then we've got about another 50% from a portfolio of local supplies. And so getting into the climate bond. So, here we have a list of some of the coalition priorities that we were advocating for the climate bond. The items that have a star next to them were specifically our board adopted priorities. And so last year, our board approved 5 priorities in the climate bond: recycled water. We've obviously got our Pure Water Southern California project that I'll talk more about. Conservation has been a big priority, not only with the regs, but also we have a conservation agreement that is part of our reductions of water usage on the Colorado River. Dam safety. Metropolitan does operate a number of dams, but this largely came through the San Diego County Water Authority and their interest in improving dams. Regional conveyance, I'll talk more about that. And then flood protection and reactivation. Here, we were particularly focused on Delta levees. We joined in partnership with the Delta Counties Coalition to make a joint ask for additional funding for a few state programs that are focused on Delta levee maintenance and improvements. And fortunately, we're able to get funding for that. But if you look generally, we were advocating with a coalition of others that included business, labor, local government, and some social justice organizations, that the climate bond should be primarily focused on water infrastructure. That was our primary focus, and we were asking for 6.65 billion. Obviously, that did not end up being the case. In total, the water section was the largest category in the bond, but in total, it only made up 3.8 billion. And out of our priorities, it ended up at 2.74 billion. One thing I would note is that, as a contractor to the State Water Project, we are 47% of the water allocations on the project. We did request 500 million for State Water Project public benefit, and that would have included some funding for renewable energy. And so, as you know, the state has a 100% renewable energy goal that we're trying to work towards, and that funding would have really been helpful for additional energy procurement. But the discussions around Delta infrastructure have been so contentious. Unfortunately, no funding was allocated for that. And so now I'll get into some of the areas where we have existing projects or expect to be prioritizing projects based on the funding in the climate bond. And so starting with safe drinking water. So, $610 million was allocated for safe drinking water. This is literally a photo from our Weymouth treatment plant, one of our scientists there analyzing water samples. But within this category, it's for grants and loans to improve water quality. And so issues like PFAS and Chrome 6 remediation, and also funding to address groundwater contamination, in addition to a number of other issues. And so while we do not independently operate any groundwater banks, we do have several partnerships, several groundwater banking partnerships. One of them being the Arvin Edison Groundwater Banking Program. And so we've got over 90,000 acre feet of water banked there. And so out of 86 wells that are a part of this program, one challenge is that 77 of those wells are contaminated with 123 TCP. And so the water board set a maximum contaminant level. And out of those 77 wells with where they identified TCP, 68 of them are above the maximum contaminant level. And so despite, the partnership, it's been a great partnership, we've been unable to get the full benefit of that water because of those contaminants. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to use some of the funds to address groundwater contamination for Arvin Edison, but also for our possibly for our AVEC project. The other thing I would note around safe drinking water is that chromium-6 remediation is going to be a big issue. Obviously, the water board is implementing regs around their maximum contaminant level for chromium-6. And frankly, I've heard a lot of water agencies talk about challenges and concerns with finding funding to address that. And so Coachella Valley Water District is actually looking to move legislation this coming session that would remove water agencies from legal liability insofar as they're in the process of working through a compliance program with the State Water Board. And so as I understand it, the State Board doesn't necessarily like that approach. They've kind of frowned on the possibility of legislation like that coming around. And so we have been working through Aqua. They've set up a working group to try to identify some alternatives and some strategies to try to make the proposal effective. But that's certainly an issue of interest. And then also, as you may know, the State Water Board is currently working through their draft PFAS regulations. And so a draft is expected to be released next year with a final proposal for a maximum contaminant level for PFAS to be moved sometime in 2026. And so this water quality funding is really going to be critical for local agencies. The other key item is regional conveyance for us. And so this pot of funds for 75 million is about improving regional and interregional water supply reliability, particularly to address instances of drought. And so a few years ago, just to highlight this map here, the dark orange areas are what we consider our state water project dependent areas. And so those are the areas in our system where they primarily rely on state water project water. We have not completed our work in building out the infrastructure so that they can get Colorado River water as well. When we're in a situation where the state water project allocation is too low. And so we're interested in building basically water supply reliability by connecting our supplies from Diamond Valley Lake and from the Colorado River to be able to reach and access some of these areas so that they have additional reliability in times of drought, and particularly when those allocations are low. And so there's kind of two phases of the project. There's an east and a west phase of the project. We've received funding to complete the western phase of the project. The eastern phase of the project is working to be completed. And we're still looking to get some funding for the west side of the project for our Sepulveda pump station, where we'll be looking to connect the Weymouth and Dimer treatment plants to this northwestern area of our territory, so that as we treat the water coming from the Colorado River, we can move that up into the northwest areas of our service area and make sure those folks have supply reliability there. So recycled water, this is a big priority for us. We have our own Pure Water Southern California project. Our board has not yet approved kind of the full scope of how big the project is going to be. It's largely been due to cost concerns. Frankly, we have a lot of big projects that are currently in the works, and we're going through a climate adaptation master plan for water process right now, where our board has kind of been identifying priorities and kind of trying to sort through how they want to build out our various projects for water supplies. But recycled water continues to be a priority. If you look at this map here, each of these water droplets across the district is a different local or regional recycled water project. And so in addition to our own, you may be familiar with the city of Los Angeles. They have Operation Next. We are a bit ahead of them, but we're trying to figure out if there's some ways to integrate our project into theirs. IEUA, or the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, also has their own recycled water project. They're another one of our member agencies. And then we're in phase one of Pure Water San Diego, which is going to help improve their water supply reliability. One of the things we've been looking to in particular with this recycled water funding is that we were able to get language in the bond that establishes separate large-scale project criteria. Under the current recycled water project grants, they only allow up to $15 million per project. And so our project alone is going to be over $6 billion. And so we decided and agreed that we absolutely need alternative criteria when it comes to large scale projects to help those projects move the needle. And a piece of that is that 10% of those funds will be allowed for planning and design. And the reason that's important is because our project is going to feed into a lot of these local projects. And so we have a lot of member agencies who are interested in being able to receive funding so that they can build out the infrastructure that they'll need to connect into our Pure Water project. And so farms, ranches, and working land. So, as I noted, water infrastructure was a priority for us, but we did also identify some benefits outside of water infrastructure and into some of the other environmental categories. And so what you see here is a picture of some farmland that we've leased out to some farmers on our Delta Islands. And so there's $65 million, granted the total category is 300 million, but there's a $65 million grant that's intended to promote practices on farms and ranches that improve soil health and accelerate atmospheric carbon sequestration. And so, we're exploring ways to get some of those grant funds to be able to develop carbon removal projects on our Delta Islands. And one thing of interest to us has been what we call mitigation banking, where when you want to develop a let's say a big infrastructure project, and I know you guys are largely familiar with this, we've got to do mitigation work as a condition of that project. And so what we'd like to do, rather than simply having to go out and mitigate, depending on the scope of the project, the mitigation could actually be relatively small. What we'd like to do is think about more comprehensive approaches where we could buy credits into an existing mitigation bank, where carbon sequestration could be an opportunity. And so rather than those project proponents having to go out on their own and procure land, develop a management process, and pay for it in perpetuity, they could literally purchase credits in an existing mitigation bank or even a carbon sequestration project, rather than having to do that on their own. And then another area, so this is a picture of Diamond Valley Lake. And so we've got a number of trails and adjacent facilities as a part of the lake for public access. And so out of this $700 million pot, $200 million is going to go towards park restoration and enhancement to improve recreational opportunities. And so we're very interested in securing some of this funding to use to improve our water and sewer upgrades on the lake, and also possibly the construction of a campground to help improve public access and education there. And then there's also a $100 million pot that's intended to expand recreational opportunities around non-motorized trails. And so we have a range of trails that go through these acres of land. And we'd like to be able to secure some of those funds relative to our Diamond Valley Lake and Lake Skinner area. And so in terms just generally for climate bond next steps, just thought I would highlight this. So, the legislature is going to have to go through their process of actually appropriating the funds. We're expecting that to come in batches over the next several years, so that it's not going to be all allocated in this coming budget year. And then from there, the various departments and agencies will have to go through a regulatory process to establish the programs and grant criteria before these dollars actually hit the ground. In some cases, like recycled water, for example, because they have an existing recycled water grant program, we're expecting the water board in that case to just be able to receive the funds and integrate those funds directly into their existing programs. But in other cases, they will have to develop new regulations. And just one other note, one thing that we'll be watching very closely is that in the climate bond, it requires that 40% of the funding provide benefit to disadvantaged communities. And so there was a lot of discussion on how that should be interpreted in the legislature. You know, you have pockets of communities, you know, that may be very disadvantaged, but they exist within a well-resourced city. Excuse me, like, you know, I think San Francisco is a great example of that, that has, or the Bay Area, serious pockets of disadvantaged communities that exist within a relatively wealthy geography. And so we'll be very interested in seeing how they develop cleanup language or possibly address clarifications in the application of that language, because that's going to be a very important consideration as far as how these dollars are allocated, given that, you know, it's nearly 50% of the funding in the bond. And so with that, you know, this concludes my presentation. Welcome any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Jay. Before we get to that, I'll just add some context. I don't think this is news to anybody, but perhaps for those joining us from our BMI side of things. So yeah, this bond was a multi-year effort, and it really only came together in the last couple weeks of session last year. Funny enough, the pro tem of the Senate who was pushing this was also the one that signed into law, because both the governor and the lieutenant governor were out of the state at the time, so he was acting governor. Also interesting to note, when it was on the ballot, Governor Newsom was not lending any help to it. So all that to say, you know, we'd obviously debated this for several different years and always landed on the same position as I'm sure Met and I know Aqua was, and many other industry partners, which is, you know, generally speaking, we're kind of a supportive amended position, because if you're going to call it the water bond, there ought to be more water in it. And, you know, I think you had a slide on there of, you know, what the need is and what the actual was in the bond. And obviously, you know, I'm trying to avoid using the term drop in the bucket, but, you know,
Yeah.
we like our puns here. You know, it's not sufficient to match the need, obviously. And so, you know, once it became clear that the measure had legs, that's when we shifted into our support position, then, you know, obviously supported it financially on the ballot as well. So we're happy to have something, you know, more than nothing. I think our worry, and I'm sure this is echoed by all parties, is that if you got one shot at this over the next, say, 5 or 10 years, this wasn't, you know, the most ideal vehicle for a quote unquote water bond. But it is what we got. And so, you know, not to let the perfect get in the way of the good. There's a lot of good in this and a lot of opportunity for our client agencies, you know, to get some real dollars out to real projects. And so I think it's still a net positive. You know, we'll wait and see what the bond landscape looks like, you know, a couple of years down the road, if there's another opportunity to get something more in line with prior water bonds. But I think that's probably enough background there. And I will, I guess, turn it over to you, Mr. Chair. And then if there's others that have questions, let's start on that path.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jay. That was a great overview of the bond. And I think a lot of our other member firms that are not on the call are going to be interested in hearing your talk. So I'm excited to share that. But I did have a question. One of the one of the challenges that we've had several conversations with the State Water Resources Control Board and the Department of Water Resources is just how a lot of this bond funding actually gets implemented and distributed. And do you know if this bond will basically just go through the same historical channels where it's primarily going to be State Water Resources Control Board Division of Financial Assistance that's kind of responsible for distributing the funding?
You know, that is my sense, but it sounds like maybe that would be concerning for you if it was DFA. Yeah. Well, what I would say is, so there's going to be a lot of interest in cleanup language through trailer bill, through the budget process. You know, obviously there's limitations because this was approved on the ballot, but there will be some opportunities to clarify implementation through the trailer bill process. But the other thing is, you know, we hope to be very engaged as they're developing the regulations around this. So just keeping our eyes on it, making sure our feedback is at the table, and hoping they're as responsive as possible. But yeah, my sense is that it would be the Division of Financial Assistance making the allocations.
Okay. Yeah, and there, I think there's some concern just because of past experiences, but we have also observed a lot of improvement too. But you know, it just seems like it's just so hard for the state to get the money actually out there, and
Yeah,
sometimes the hurdles that each agency has to go through, by the time they go through all the processes that are required, it's almost either too late or the timing is poor, where the funding ends up not being enough because project costs have increased. You know, there's just a variety of factors that creates other barriers to actually getting a project in the ground.
yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. On top of Tyler's comment about a lot of this kind of being a drop in the bucket, so that'll be also interesting to see is kind of grant caps that they put on these various pots of funds, because you know for some of this you've got 75, $50 million, right? And so you know you're not going to be able to spread that too widely. So there, yeah, there is a lot to watch and try to engage on as they're implementing these funds for sure. Yeah, and it's a challenge. I mean, unfortunately, to Tyler's point, he, mentioned that, you all ended up supporting it once it was on the ballot. We ended up in the same position. We did not have a support position when it was before the legislature. And, our board struggled to support it even when it was on the ballot. Our ledge committee recommended staying neutral. And then we had a discussion at the board level where Senator Allen himself actually came to provide public comment about the importance of the bond. And that seemed to sway the board to move to a support position. But absent him coming in person, I don't know that we would have actually supported it.
So yeah, open it up to the attendees for any other questions for Jay. Not seeing any. Okay, well, yeah, I appreciate your time, Jay, and you definitely don't have to stay on for some of our other business items on the rest of the agenda. But yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time and providing the talk. And I imagine the slides could be made available.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send them to Tyler, and yeah, he could distribute. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We made it easy for you today.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for having me. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.